Привіт. I'm Chuck Olinik, a Ukrainian-American who was baptized with the name Yaroslav. And guess what? I used my baptismal name as my name in the historical reenactment group, the Society for Creative Anachronism. One of the things I decided to do with my spare time, not being in the classroom anymore, I decided to start putting together what I knew about Slavic mythology and Slavic folklore, and putting this all together into videos in a series I call Tales of the Borderland. So it's kind of a nod to Ukraine there. And every time I create a category, I notice things don't want to necessarily stay in that category. What I was doing was covering the mythology and the folklore, but now I have to slide into the history stuff, which actually makes sense because you can't really do some of this stuff without putting the things into a historical context. So here I am. I'm now looking at wading into the early history of Kyiv and of Rus, and looking at some of the sources that we rely on for the period. So we're starting with a guy named Oleg. And if you're reading the title, you're going to see Oleg and you're going to seem confused, like, you know what? Ukrainians will end up saying an H rather than a G. All right? So the Ukrainian version is Oleg. Russian version's Oleg. If everyone reads it in English, it's Oleg. And the Norse called him Helgi. And he was, in some sources, he was a Varangian prince of the Rus, who by tradition becomes the first Prince of Kyiv, and that starts laying the foundations for the Kievan Rus state. And according to the Primary Chronicle, Oleg was supposed to be a relative or a kinsman of Rurik, and he was entrusted by Rurik to take care of both his realm and his son Igor. All right? Which means you can get into the Young Frankenstein stuff and Igor and all that stuff. So we got that joke out of the way. However, that relationship between Rurik and Oleg, it's kind of debatable. Oleg may have been a client prince who served as the army commander to Rurik. Whatever the case, he will eventually seize power in Kyiv, like in 881, 882, and he's going to trick and then slay Askold and Dir, who were probably more likely in line to be running Kyiv. And he sets himself up as Prince of Kyiv. And the Primary Chronicle will refer to him as the first prince. Later sources start calling him the Veliki Knyaz, or the Grand Prince, but that wasn't a title that was in use yet. Well, by the next year, Oleg is subjugating various tribes, and then what he ends up doing is he's subjugated these various tribes, he's forcing them to pay tribute and finding out, like, hey, are you guys paying tribute to those guys? No, you can't do that anymore. You're paying to me. It's my job to protect you. So they're kind of under his wing there. And in 907, he ends up attacking the city of Constantinople. And he is to bring 2,000 boats. Well, when Oleg gets to Constantinople, the city is all locked up, and there's actually chains stretched across the harbor, and that's going to kind of mess things up with the boats. Well, what he apparently does is he ends up having wheels built. The wheels get attached to the boats, and they end up getting moved overland. And so the city is attacked, and the citizens of Constantinople figure out, hey, this is not going well, and the Emperor Leo, basically wants to negotiate. And an embassy gets sent, and they're offering Oleg food and drink, and I guess he has kind of an instinct kick in and go, this stuff's poisoned. Yeah, we're not going to do that. But we'll work out a negotiation. We'll deal, with this peace treaty. And it's interesting, the Byzantines don't really talk about this particular war that happened in 907, but it's like there's a lot of heavy detail in the Primary Chronicle, even down to like the treaty details. So what ends up happening is, okay, the treaty's concluded, and Oleg and his people hang their shields up on the gates outside Constantinople. And like, okay, bye. And then they're basically going to retire back to Kyiv. But here's what the Primary Chronicle says about it. In the years 6412 to 6415, Oleg attacked the Greeks, leaving Ihor in Kyiv. He took with him a multitude of Varangians, Slavs, and others whom the Greeks label collectively as Great Scythia. With all of these, Oleg attacked on horseback and in ships, and the number of his vessels was 2,000. He arrived before Tsargrad, but the Greeks closed the strait and fortified the city. Oleg disembarked upon the shore and began to fight. They waged war in the outskirts of the city and killed many Greeks. They also destroyed many palaces and burned churches. Of the prisoners they captured, some they beheaded, some they tortured, others they shot, and still others they cast into the sea. The Russians inflicted many other woes upon the Greeks after the usual manner of enemies. Oleg commanded his warriors to make wheels and to fit the ships with wheels. When a favorable wind rose up, they spread sail and bore down upon the city by land. The Greeks were frightened to see this, and sent an embassy to Oleg, saying, "Do not destroy the city, and we will pay whatever tribute you desire." Oleg ordered his armies to halt. The Greeks then brought food and wine to him, but he would not accept it, because it was poisoned. The Greeks were frightened and said, "This is not Oleg, but Saint Demetrius, whom God has sent upon us." So Oleg demanded they pay tribute for his 2,000 ships at the rate of 12 hryvnia per man, with 40 men to a ship. Thus, Tsars Leo and Alexander made peace with Oleg. After agreeing upon the tribute, they bound themselves by mutual oaths. The Tsars kissed the cross, while Oleg and his men took oaths in accordance with Rus law, swearing by their weapons and by their god Perun, as well as by Volos, the god of cattle. Thus the peace was confirmed. Oleg then said, "Fashion sails of silk for the Rus and sails of linen for the Slavs," and it was done. The Rus hung their shields upon the gates as a sign of victory, and they left Tsargrad. The Rus spread their silken sails. The Slavs spread sails of linen, but the wind tore them. Then the Slavs said, "We'll stay with our simple sails. Linen sails are not for the Slavs." So Oleg returned to Kyiv, bearing gold, linen, fruit, and wine, along with every sort of adornment. The people called Oleg a prophet, but they were pagans and unenlightened. Now, Oleg is going to die about 5 years after this treaty is negotiated, and there were legends that were associated with his death. And there was a story of how, and this got really romanticized, like, all over the place. Alexander Pushkin wrote a ballad, The Song of the Wise Oleg, and that his death was prophesied by pagan priests, that Oleg would die because of his stallion. So to defy the prophecy, he's supposed to have sent his favorite stallion away. I ain't riding that. And, he then decides a number of years later to go take a look at the stallion. And according to the legend, which is also recounted in the Primary Chronicle, he's pretty contemptuous because he says, okay, his horse is dead. This was supposed to cause his death. He, mocks the, sorcerers and, those who were telling his fortune, saying, that sucker's going to be the cause of your death. And is supposed to have put a foot on the skull of the horse or kicked the skull of the horse, like, ha! Outlived you. And here's where the Primary Chronicle tells us Oleg's ending. And Oleg lived as prince in Kyiv, keeping peace with all lands. One autumn, Oleg remembered his horse, which he had some time back decided never again to ride because he had consulted volki or sorcerers and kudesniki or fortune tellers, asking them to tell him, what will cause my death? One answered, Prince, your beloved horse, the one you ride, he will cause your death. These words sank into Oleg's soul, and he said, I will never again sit upon that horse. I will never again look upon him. And he ordered that the horse be put to pasture and never saddled again for him. Several years passed without seeing his favorite horse, not even as he campaigned against the Greeks. After he returned to Kyiv, Oleg remembered the horse which the sorcerer had predicted would cause his death, and he summoned his senior stable master. Where is that horse of mine which I ordered you to put out to pasture and to protect? The stable master answered, he died. Oleg laughed and reproached the fortune teller, saying, the sorcerers did not speak the truth. Everything was a lie. The horse died, and I live on. He ordered that his current horse be saddled for him. I want to see that horse's bones. And he rode to that place where the bare bones and fleshless skull lay. He dismounted from his steed and laughed. Was this the skull that was supposed to cause my death? He stood upon the skull with one leg. A viper slithered from the skull and bit him on the leg. He soon fell ill and died. Everyone wept great tears for him. They carried him unto the mountain called Shashkovitz and buried him there. Now there is a mound outside the city of Chernihiv, and this mound apparently has been identified as some sort of royal kurgan or royal burial place. And so stories go around saying that that's where Oleg got planted. Well, there we got a little bit of history, a little bit of the Primary Chronicle, and we're going to keep doing more of this stuff. I hope you stick with me. I hope you subscribe to my channel. So, до побачення.